Wealth, fame, power. Gold Roger, the king of the pirates, attained this and everything else the world had to offer, and his dying words drove countless to the seas. You want my treasure? You can have it. I left everything I gathered together in one place. Now you just have to find it. These words lured men to the Grand Line in pursuit of dreams greater than they ever even dared to imagine. This is the time known as the Great Pirate Era. Roger is a character who had served as a pinnacle of piracy for almost the entire show. He was the definition of the strongest, as no one we knew at the time, alive or dead, could have hoped to match his legend. He conquered the seas and surpassed all his rivals by sailing to the ends of the earth. His greatest rival was the strongest man in the Navy's known history, and his second rival and the guard of the era after him was the world's strongest man. Even with legends like Kaido, Whitebeard, Garp, Sengoku, Shiki, and Big Mom ruling in the era beside him, he stood out as the greatest even to them. So what more can a man who has accomplished everything still have left to accomplish? Roger's maximum potential is less of a matter of what he could have accomplished but never got to, and more of a matter of what did fate hold him back from. This is going to be the first in a series of maximum potential One Piece characters where I go over the theoretical maximum potential a character would be able to logically attain in the story. This will not be a me moving heaven and earth to try and change things up for them, like say giving Roger Imu's double fruit or having him be born during Joyboy's time period, but instead be things that could have logically changed or been removed without breaking the story altogether. Whenever the discussion of Roger's potential comes up, the first thing that comes to mind is the Nika Fruit. The Nika Fruit logically could have chosen Roger simply based off his personality, as Roger is shown to be very similar to both Luffy and Joyboy, with many people who have met Roger ending up seeing Roger within Luffy. The Nika Fruit, however, did not choose Roger because Roger wouldn't have survived to see the age when it needed to be active to fulfill Joyboy's prophecy. But what if Roger did survive to see it? Roger's illness being unable to be cured is something that we theoretically could just remove from out of the story, as it doesn't change up much besides the fact that Roger died. Starting the Great Pirate Era is still entirely feasible, as multiple people were setting sail simply to try and go out to kill Roger and take his spot as Pirate King. In this instance, it would be the same thing causing the Great Pirate Era, which is the desire to surpass Roger and attain everything the world has to offer. So when exactly would Roger have eaten the fruit? There are 2 points Roger could have eaten the fruit, and depending on which point he does eat it, it changes up the story massively. Roger could have either eaten the fruit during the East Blue before he first met Rayleigh, or after he had circumnavigated the globe the first time before finding Laughdale when he was 39 years old, the year before he goes to God Valley. If Roger eats the fruit at the start of his journey, he would essentially be just like Luffy trajectory-wise, with him getting better with the base form of the fruit, as he would now be stuck with it longer than Luffy was. Roger's era was not as challenging for a new guy coming up as Luffy's was, as there were, as far as we can see anyways, no people sitting at the top just crushing everyone. Roger would become extremely creative with the ability and still have had to hone his haki to an extent that Luffy never had to. We don't know much about Roger's life, but we do know he had advanced Conqueror's haki by the time he fought Garp the first time in the Rocks flashback, so theoretically Roger could have also awakened the Nika by this point as well, depending on how hard of a battle it was for him to awaken ACOG. We do know that Roger and Garp have nearly killed each other numerous times in the past, and if Roger started out with the Nika Fruit, it would push Garp to be even stronger to catch up to him and even the playing field, thusly increasing Garp's potential strength to still match with Roger. This would also boost Rocks, as Rocks and Roger fought numerous times during their era as well and stood alongside one another, with Rocks surpassing him slightly. However, due to Roger now having the Nika Fruit, essentially making him the new Joyboy, he would stand above Rocks in the scenario, making his era last about 2 to 3 decades longer than it did in the original story. If Roger gets the Nika Fruit at the start of his journey, what you essentially would have had is essentially a prime Luffy by the time we got to God Valley. God Valley in this instance changes up drastically now, as Imu would have to go there for Rocks and end up having to pivot to trying to take out both Rocks and Roger. Seeing how Imu's battle with Loki went, Rocks would more or less be like Loki in this instance, as Imu in his silhouette form I do not believe would be capable of Domi reversing Rocks if Roger has Gear 5 and was also fighting him. This version of Roger, coupled with a stronger version of Rocks and Garp, and all the Rocks pirates too, would force Imu to either have to come down in person or cut his losses and try again after God Valley, which would ensure his defeat, as the whole reason God Valley took place was to prevent Rocks from surviving, as he would get closer to his true potential too. What you'd essentially have is Imu having to face the top of the world in God Valley, or letting Rocks reach his true potential in addition to Roger, and these two now being comrades with a common goal of taking him out on top of Garp. If Roger was able to eat the Nika Fruit at the start of his journey, he may put Imu on the back foot for decades and would now cause Rocks to live into his era, with it now being him and Rocks standing shoulder to shoulder instead of him and Whitebeard. In this scenario, the Rocks pirates may end up going to do their own things after, but still function as Rocks' allies, with Roger and Rocks deciding to take Imu out together and then fighting for the top themselves afterwards, as Roger would still not want to king over him. I could go even further about what would change going into the future past God Valley, but I'll save that for you guys in the comments to speculate, as this is more of a discussion piece than a theory. Alternatively, however, like I said, Roger could have also eaten the fruit after he circumnavigated the globe before God Valley. I'm not sure if it is directly stated he did, but logically Roger had to have sailed around the world from the other side of the Red Line for him to have been able to get to the West Blue to go to God Valley. A year had passed between fighting Lodestar and God Valley, so it's not unreasonable for him to have went back to the East Blue and eaten the Nika Fruit, especially if the Nika Fruit sees him as Joyboy's successor now for going to the last known island and learning about the poneglyphs. If Roger eats the fruit 1 year before God Valley, then this changes up the story in a different way now, as Rocks would still have been the top of the era the entire time up until now, but Imu would see Roger with the Nika Fruit assumed and be in disbelief of the fact that he has it. Roger in this instance would still be too weak to do anything serious to change the tide against Imu, as he's still just figuring out his abilities. A year with the fruit is still not a long time. We need to remember that Luffy took 10 years to master it, and even after 10 years of mastery, it still took him basically a year to learn the gears and 1.5 years to learn Gear 4. The actions of God Valley would still go pretty much the same, ending in the defeat of Rocks, but I believe that Imu would also go after Roger trying to kill him, with this being his moment to awaken Gear 5. It's likely that Imu Domi reversed Rocks, killed Roger, and left, and then after leaving, Roger awakens the Nika Fruit and uses its abilities to turn the tide against Domi Rocks alongside Garp, defeating him. After dying to Imu and becoming Nika, Roger would continue on as he does in the main story, with him fighting the others in his era and then growing stronger and stronger. The difference is that Roger would blow by all of them with a much wider gap now, Garp included. Where in the first theoretical, Garp had to grow alongside Roger with the Nika Fruit, this Garp grew alongside a Roger without it, and then had to watch him get the awakened Nika in 1 year. That is a very hard gap to bridge, especially since Roger has to learn how to use the fruit and its abilities now too. Garp would get much stronger in the interim because he'd be fighting very hard to close the gap, but I don't think he ever would. In this scenario, Roger would stand head and shoulders above everyone at the top of the era, similar to how Luffy will by the end of the story. Roger's desire to find Laugh-Tale would still exist, and Imu would find out that Roger is still alive through him defeating Rocks on God Valley, making Imu now go from beelining Rocks to beelining Roger. Roger, however, has shown himself to be capable of handling the Holy Knights even without the fruit, so now that he does have it, Imu can only ever really pull up himself to face Roger, which is not smart as he'd be fighting Roger plus his own crew. If Summers and Killingham, even with Omen, get handled by Zoro and Sanji, then no one else in the Holy Knights at the time besides maybe an Omen amped Garland could contest Gabon and Rayleigh. The story would go as it currently does, with Roger asking Whitebeard for Odin joining, and now deterring Imu even further as he's gotten another strong figure on the crew. Imu wouldn't go after Roger simply because the risk to reward ratio is too high for him. There's a reason he never just went out personally to go and get Rocks or send the Holy Knight after him with Omen, and that would be the same reason why he wouldn't just go face Roger. Roger would learn the true history on Laugh-Tale, and instead of seeing it as something he would need to pass down to the next generation, he would realize that he's the one who is called to crush Imu and prepare for that. He would go to Fishman Island and ask when Shirahoshi is to be born, and would simply live out his life afterwards until that point. One thing I do want to add is that in the interim point between then, I think that Roger and Harold would meet, as Imu would send Harold after Roger to try and take him out, as Harold at that point would have been Imu's strongest soldier with no losses he could incur to himself by losing him. In Roger facing Harold, I believe that Harold would change his perspective more for Roger than for Rocks, because Roger has no desire to conquer the world like Rocks did, and thusly Harold has no reason to call Roger a villain the same way he did for Rocks. After losing Rocks as well, and with Roger being there to say what he saw on God Valley, Roger may be able to change Harold's mind towards the government completely, especially if Odin is also able to get a word in with Harold, as he would understand his position of trying to be a ruler. Couple that with Verley and Gabon, who are more empathetic than the members of the Rocks Pirates would be, and Roger would be capable of enlisting Harold as an ally, with him possibly gaining a new drive to try and get the Nidhogg fruit. You guys can decide whether or not if he get the fruit in this scenario, but I personally think he would, as I think he would try to push himself harder to try and attain it for his people, essentially blooming mid-fight with Ragnar. Roger would simply be the big fish of the era and acquiring allies slowly but surely. I believe that Odin would still want to go back to Wano and face Kaido, even if Roger wasn't gonna die, but due to his experience in the scenario, he would be much stronger and more driven in the initial confrontation and smoke Kaido early before it even gets to the 5-year point, as he would know what time is coming and whose side Wano needs to be fighting for. In this instance, he would see Orochi as Shogun and instantly take him out, as well as Kaido. I could see him killing Kaido, but I could also see Joyboy being brought up in the battle with Odin, and Odin telling Kaido that Roger is Joyboy, to which after defeating Kaido and proving that if Odin isn't even Joyboy and he could be Kaido, then how much stronger would Roger be, leading to Kaido either siding with Roger or abandoning his dream of trying to plunge the world into violence completely. Roger has essentially dominated the whole world by the time the Great Pirate Era should start, with him literally being exactly like Joyboy and having numerous strong allies all over the world. In all honesty, he might also have went to Alabasta and befriended Titi and Cobra before Titi dies, giving him his Lily of the Era like Luffy has with Vivi. Titi is Vivi's mom for those who don't remember. Due to Shirahoshi still not being fully grown yet, Roger would wait until she's of age, which in One Piece is 16 years old, meaning he would be an old man by the time he decides to challenge Imu. This means one very important thing, which is that Shanks and Roger would still be their own men by the time that Roger is ready to go after Imu. Blackbeard, now having to contend with the idea that he has to face both Roger and Imu, may choose a different route for his dream, with him trying much harder to get more physically powerful instead of scheming in the shadows and hiding his true power like he does in the original story, which causes him to not benefit from Haki Blooms the same way that Shanks did. For Shanks, he would be much stronger in this scenario initially, as would Buggy, as without Roger dying and them splitting off, they would more than likely stay with Roger until they turn about 20 or 18 and then decide to start their own crews afterwards, with them being able to fight on the Roger Pirate at the height of their youth for much longer. Shanks in this scenario would most definitely not be able to go back to Marijua, and thusly Shamrock would never meet his brother in a mutual sense. Roger being so strong now as well would make Imu have to push his God's Knights to be even more powerful to contend with them, which would now see the new generation of God's Knights be even more monstrous powerhouses than they are in the current story. The Navy would also have to overcorrect, effect and become even greater, with them having a much higher tier of fighters as their requirements will become more strict, especially with Garp not being Roger's direct equal anymore, leading to him focusing on bolstering the navy for the pirates to come, and focusing completely on that, with him giving the generation of the navy that Akainu, Aokiji, and Kizaru grew in the same kind of attention he gave to Kobe, while also being much younger and more vigorous. In this scenario as well, I'm not even sure if the Revolutionary Army would start, or if Dragon would decide to try and sail alongside Roger after God Valley, with him maybe being a shadow ally to them after growing older and then deciding to start his own thing, as he also would have a conqueror spirit. Characters like Big Mom and Whitebeard would still be doing their own thing but be soft allies to Roger, as they would really have no devastating beef with him. Ace and Luffy in this scenario too would be like Roger, with them rising up quickly, but they would not be brothers in this scenario but rivals instead, and actually rivals, not the same way that Law and Kid are supposed to be. Ace would initially start off as being the stronger one by far much earlier, as he's experienced so many strong people, but with Garp wanting to train Luffy to surpass him even more so, and possibly Dragon even taking more of an active role in Luffy's life as he doesn't have to run the army in the same way, Luffy would also start off as much stronger, with him being a hockey-based fighter like his grandfather is. Now after all of this, it begs the question, will Roger actually be the one to survive to beat Imu in this scenario, as he's going to be 80 years old by the time that Shirahoshi is old enough to fulfill the prophecy, and all of his crew would still be old men. We know that old men in One Piece are powerful, and Roger would maintain very well, especially with the Nika Fruit, but I doubt that he would be the one. I believe that Roger would die in the first fight against Imu, but that Luffy would pick up the mantle right after him, with him serving the MC role he does now. Remember that Shanks didn't meet Luffy until he was 24 years old, meaning it's still entirely possible for Shanks to have still inspired Luffy, and Shanks would still have the straw hat in this scenario, as he had it long before Roger even died. It's very likely that Shanks would have seen that Roger might not be the one, even if he does have the fruit, and put in an insurance plan after seeing someone exactly like him born in his blue. With Luffy having the goal of surpassing both Shanks and Roger, I see him being as strong or even stronger than he is now by the time he gets the fruit, and with him awakening it so quickly in the main story after getting into actual conflicts, I think he'd do the same thing after Roger dies. With Roger's allies being so aged as well, they'd also have bolstered their own successors in the meantime. Harold would have bolstered Loki and Harden, even if Loki wouldn't have the Nidhogg fruit. Garp would have bolstered Aokiji and Kobe would still end up joining the navy if Luffy set out to sea. Ace would still be alive in the scenario, Momonosuke would have been raised by Oden, and Yamato possibly would have been able to set out to sea on her own too, as she isn't being held down by her father anymore, and Shirahoshi and Vivi would still be born. All of Luffy's allies would still be powerful, or even more powerful than they are in the current story, making Luffy poised to rebound after Roger loses the fight to Imu, with Roger possibly nerfing Imu by the time Luffy fights him, making it a joint effort between two Joyboys to defeat him. Luffy after this, however, would still have the threat of Blackbeard to worry about, but you guys can decide what Blackbeard would be accomplishing in the background during the scenario. That is all I have for this video. This is going to be more of a build your own story, as I want to see how exactly you guys think it would change if Roger did reach his maximum potential. Would he beat Imu and fulfill Joyboy's prophecy, or would he still prepare the way for Luffy to rise as a true successor? As always, if you enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe, and stay tuned in for more high quality One Piece content. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.